Today we're going to have a look at how we construct a frequency histogram and a frequency polygon. So what we need is a large data set. Makes it certainly easier than a small data set. So a frequency histogram is a type of column graph, and there are no gaps between the columns. It's important that we have that. But there is a little bit of a gap at the beginning, and I'll show you that in a moment. The horizontal axis, horizontal this way, represents the scores, and our vertical axis represents the frequency of each score. So let's have a look at an example. So we want to construct just a histogram, a frequency histogram this time for the following data set. So here are our scores, 7 through to 12, and this is how frequent they are. So there are 5 7s, 8 8s, 6 9s, 11 10s, 4 11s, and 8 12s. So to get started, we need to come up with our horizontal axis, and our horizontal axis represents the scores. Our vertical axis represents the frequency. But what we need to now do is work out an appropriate scale along here. So if you've got a grid book or grid paper, that makes it easier. Otherwise, I suggest that I do a marking every 1 centimetre. So they're to represent our scores, and I'll label them 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You do notice I have gone 1 extra. And that'll be a little bit more apparent why I've done that as we go through later on. What I also do is I mark every ½ centimetre, and that's where my columns are going to start and finish. So once I've done my horizontal axis, we're now going to have a look at our vertical axis, and we start to set up our scale. Remember, my vertical axis is representing the frequency. Here's my frequency, and the highest frequency is 11, so I have to go up to at least 11. Okay? And choose an appropriate scale on which we can do so. So we do that, and I'm going to go up by 1s because I've got plenty of room to be able to do that. So we've set up our axes. Now let's do our column graph. So it started on this half mark here and ended on this half mark, and my score of 7 had a frequency of 5, so my column above the 7 goes up to 5. My score of 8 has a frequency of 8, so my column 8 has to come up to 8. But you notice, remember that I've left that half gap width there, and you'll see why that's important in just a moment. So there's my score of 8 with a column of 8. So just make sure that you set it up like that. Not like this. This is not the way to go, because I can't tell if that's the 7 column or that's the 7 column. So it's important that I make sure I have that half column width gap that's there. So I can tell that my score is in the middle of the column. There's no confusion at all between that. So let's continue. Our score of 9 has a frequency of 6, so our score of 9 has to go up to 6. And our score of 10 goes up to 11. Our score of 11 goes up to 4, and my score of 12 goes up to 8. So I just did all those there at once, and I think you get the idea of what they do. So that's my frequency histogram. No gaps between the columns. The only gap is that half column width gap there. And you'll notice that I've got that extra mark still there, and you'll see why when we come to the polygon. So frequency histogram. So let's now look at a frequency polygon. And this is a type of line graph. Earlier in geometry, you would have known that a polygon is a closed shape with many sides. So we have to remember that closed part as well. And that'll seem a bit more apparent as we come through. So again, horizontal axis is our scores, and our vertical axis represents our frequency. So same example, scores 7 through to 12, the same frequency as we had before. So we'll set up our axes in exactly the same way. Our scores 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 with that extra mark there. My half marks in between, and my frequency going up to 11, going up the vertical axis there. So let's start and do our first point. A score of 7 has a frequency of 5, so a score of 7 goes up to 5, and I put a dot directly above that score. Do the same thing with the score of 8. It has a frequency of 8, so score of 8, frequency of 8. Let's put my dot there to represent that. Score of 9 has a frequency of 6. The score of 10 has a frequency of 11. Remembering it's directly above that score. Score of 11 has a frequency of 4, and the score of 12 has a frequency of 8. So I've put all my dots there. And if I was to put that over the top of the frequency histogram, you'll notice that they're right in the middle at the top of each of those columns. Okay? So let's get rid of that and let's start to join our dots with straight lines. So we just join them up. But we said, remember, that it's a frequency polygon, and a polygon is a shape, a closed shape of many sides. So we're going to close it with this horizontal axis. So we're going to join that dot with the very beginning of the graph here, as we've just done, and we'll do the same here as if we're going back to 0 for the next score. So we join it back to our horizontal axis. So there's our polygon. It's closed now. And if you just want to see what it looks like, because quite often they ask you to do the frequency histogram and polygon together, that's what they both look like together. So there's my histogram, the column graph, and the line graph there, joining the middle of each column and ending back at the horizontal axis. So that's a lesson on frequency histograms and polygons for a large data set. So I hope you learned something with that. Enjoy and practice as much as you can. The more you practice, the better you get.